Across the many different endings to Cyberpunk 2077, there are a lot of hidden details. From shards chronicling tidbits of extra lore, hidden items you don't want to miss, additional branching details depending on earlier game decisions, and much more. In this video, we'll be uncovering and delving into all of that, so stick around as we explore all the hidden secrets for the 6 big conclusions to Cyberpunk 2077, starting of course by completing the game's most famous quest objective. Finally meeting Hanako at Embers is of course the prerequisite to all bar the Phantom Liberty ending of the game, though that one too, if available, can still be accessed after doing this. Embers marks the moment that Hanako Arasaka changes her mind and crucially informs us that Mikoshi can be accessed in Night City. And if you're a Street Kid, this won't actually be the first time you've come here, technically. In the Street Kid opening to the game, where we're sent to steal a Rayfield Arendite, it's actually the Embers garage that we head to. A totally different part of the building, of course, and the fact it's Embers probably doesn't register as important that close to the start of the game, but just remember that run-in with Kaoru Fujioka, that lovely Arasaka exec who orders both us and Jackie to be executed simply because he can't be bothered with the faff of legal proceedings. That is your standard Embers clientele. So you can perhaps imagine the uproar that must have ensued when all of said clientele were booted out of the club to make way for Hanako, many of whom it's clear were still in the middle of eating. The shard, found upon our entry, simply mentions Hanako as a VIP guest, which means a hell of a lot when your entire clientele is Night City's elite. They attempted to add a personal touch, maybe a little bonus or a voucher to each of their clients to not piss off the regulars too much, but were otherwise aware that Hanako's visit could very well determine the future of Embers. That is how powerful the Arasaka family is. Looking around the other tables, we can find a biographic shard on Hanako herself, which was clearly being read by the bar staff, and upstairs a copy of Josh Kevorkian's Stop Complaining, Get Rich Today. A very condescending message about achieving success, which ultimately fails to address the fact that Night City is designed to set you up for failure. Josh Kevorkian, by the way, has an investment program with financial advice you should probably never follow, and who will crop up again in a couple of other endings. Presumably whoever was reading this is a junior corpo in the making, or hey, maybe even Josh Kevorkian himself was just having dinner here and reading about himself, or reading stuff that he'd written. But then speaking to Hanako, she'll explain that Yorinobu's continuous disregard for her safety has swayed her to finally turn against him, and she's gonna need our help to boot him from the Arasaka boards. Part of the more overarching Arasaka plotline, which I recount more fully in my main story of Cyberpunk 2077 Explained video. But for this one, we're going to be keeping more on the topic of hidden details, so I'll be skirting over the more obvious story bits. Heading out to make up our mind before passing out, and we'll wake up at Victor's, soon to make our ultimate ending choice. But prior to that, having a little look around the clinic, there's a few shards highlighting even further Victor's love of boxing. A boxing monthly column called Left Jab, several trophies, and some boxing gloves, right next to Victor's certificate for 2nd place in the Watson Boxing Championships back in 2061. More importantly though, there's the emails on Vic's computer. A sweet one from Misty, apologizing for being late. A threatening one from the very same scav den we raided with Jackie at the start of the game, and we can actually find the other end of this email back in there. And finally at Victor's, an offer from Biotechnica, offering Vic's clinic the chance to join their franchise. Something he evidently ignores for now, but in 2 years, well, we'll get to that later. Otherwise, it is up to the roof with Misty for the choice that everything has been leading up to. So let's sequentially explore the hidden details of each in the, well, roughly the same order by which I ranked them from worst to best, starting with the darkest timeline. So choosing to accept Hanako's offer right off the bat can actually be done in a way you may not realize. See, when discussing our options with Johnny, choosing either Panam or Hanako will mean having to take the beta blockers and silence Johnny out. But what this also means is that prior to taking them, we can actually lie to Johnny and say we're going to ask for Panam's help, choosing her as an option at first, silencing him, before coldly and evilly phoning Hanako instead. So Just chuck that on the roster of conniving, evil corpo choices you could make. Following that, we'll head downstairs, get a tarot reading from Misty, warning us we're probably doomed, before being picked up by Hellman, and if we saved him earlier in the game, Takemura too, whose absence will be sorely missed in this ending in particular if we didn't save him, as he probably otherwise has the biggest role in the whole devil ending overall. But with that, the 2 or 3 of us will drive to the Arasaka residence, where again, if you're a corpo, you have some additional options here. You can attempt to blag your way into the residence, saying we're here on behalf of Susan Abernathy, only to learn that she is actually dead, giving the ruse away and forcing Hellman to run the guy over. Then, heading into the Arasaka residence and taking out the guards, there's not actually a huge amount in the ways of lore here. Make sure not to miss the Genjiro smart pistol, unless you visited and picked it up earlier in the game, but other than that, the only quest-specific reading material here is the laptop closest to Hanako. This will include the Ember's note that we saw earlier, an inquiry from one of Yorinobu's people into the Secure Your Soul program, which it turns out has run into unforeseen complications, only able to back up the soul-killed cloned consciousnesses inside Mikoshi with 19% effectiveness, as opposed to a target 60%. Basically, and this isn't actually brought front and center during the story at any point, but it looks like Arasaka are not only storing engrams to make the elite immortal, they're also attempting to clone multiple copies of them, perhaps with the intent of extracting knowledge from those copies to then gain control of whatever assets those elites owned in life. Remember this detail, as it's potentially going to be very important for a big decision later, and Secure Your Soul is actually a genius tool in this regard to make Arasaka more powerful. Own what's left of the world's most powerful people, and you will pretty much own then the whole world. And the final email notes how several of the medical procedures went on Secure Your Soul clients, mentioning that some had to be quarantined, deleted, and some clients even dying during the procedure. Though again, it seems that Arasaka's concern for these people as individuals is entirely non-existent. Next to Hanako's bed is also a picture of her with Saburo and Yorinobu, highlighting how she still harbors care for both of them. She hasn't covered either of their faces up. But other than that, after securing Hanako, it's on to Arasaka Tower. Now a team of 3 or 4 if Takemura's there, soon to be 5 if we also spared Oda and disgusted Adam Smasher by showing mercy. Before that though, we'll be heading through a familiar location. This indoor courtyard area is something that Johnny remembered from the 2023 flashback, and in 2077, at the end, is an exact replica of Saburo's office in Tokyo, where, on the table, is the same picture Hanako had by her bedside, Saburo's copy, where he has deliberately placed a pencil over the face of Yorinobu, presumably done prior to his own death, and therefore suggesting a deeply seated dislike for his son. Down into Mikoshi, and we'll come face to face with the engram of the man himself, merely a pane of glass away from the room that in most other endings we'll have to descend through absolute hell to get to. Whereas, this time, despite being so easily reached, it remains inaccessible. Corpos here can extend the proper courtesy to the Arasaka Emperor. Cool people can flip him the bird on behalf of Johnny, whilst those who sent Jackie to Victor's clinic earlier on at the end of the heist can also come face to face with the horror of a poorly reconstructed Jackie Wells engram. But aside from that, more hidden details are found further into this quest. The Arasaka rainforest floor actually doesn't yield much in terms of those details, at least not in this ending, with the only thing being another dialogue option specific to corpos, berating them for so quickly moving past Saburo's questionable death, putting self-interest above loyalty. Not that said loyalty at all is going to extend in the opposite direction, as we'll soon find out. So after the fighting breaks out and Yorinobu begins his coup, heading to the upper atrium, potentially accompanied by Takemura, these next floors have a lot of computer terminals, some with very interesting insights into Arasaka. On the left of the first combat area, we can read an email from a familiar name that you probably don't remember. Hajime Taki resolves arms deals for Arasaka and is the guy that we and Jackie had been sent to meet up with that day at Konpeki Plaza. Of course, we never do, we're there for other reasons, but stopping by the bar on our way in during the heist, we can actually see him talking to some other corpo execs. So perhaps this here in Arasaka Tower was his actual workstation, where we can read how he handles a shipment of fuel that initially refuses to do as he asks. And with just one reply from him explaining the situation and threatening to dock their pay, they immediately bend and do as he asks. On the other side of the room are a string of emails reacting to the lockdown that's just taken place, with employees then telling each other to hide. Indeed, looking around these rooms, we can see that even non-military personnel were not spared Yorinobu's wrath. Though in fairness, we do deliver to the same people a far more merciless approach in other endings. So, you know. Next to that room is a conversation between two employees, Ben Koti and Yui Tawada, with Ben attempting to convince Yui to join him in an operation clearly against company rules. Attempting to track down a person of interest, though it's not clear who, winning Yui over by inviting her to dinner. After she accepts, however, she then can't get back in contact with Ben, and 4 days later it appears he's vanished. Just another example of what Arasaka will do to employees who stick their nose in where they're not supposed to. Before heading up the stairs to the next floor, we can read another email regarding the upcoming board meeting, i.e. the massacre that we were just at. And it potentially confirms that Yorinobu was actually planning to massacre them, or at any rate, trap them and intimidate them before our intervention. With orders here to close off all upper floors of the tower, reducing security to a bare minimum, and all round just making a hostile, threatening takeover easy. Heading up to the next floor, and there are a lot of terminals up here, most of them totally empty, but the few that aren't were actually completely glitched for me, causing the camera to try and third person on V rather than focusing on the screen, but you can get around that by clicking and scrolling multiple times in the moment the camera pans. It's kind of fiddly, but there is a way around it if you want to read these yourself and are getting the same glitch. On the right hand side is first a mention of something called Operation Coldfire, which took place recently over in Podgorica, the capital of Montenegro in Europe. A spy operation, seemingly involving both netrunners and dead drops, though it's kind of unclear what it is beyond that. A little further up is an email from a guy called Kitaro Abe to himself. He's stopped taking his meds and as a result has lost all trust for his employees. He is now the only person he has faith in. And then he replies to his own message as though having read it as just a recipient, explaining then back to himself that the Corp can take everything from him aside from life itself. There's then further reassurance again from himself, and he's convinced that the Corp is trying to break him, but that they haven't succeeded yet. May very well be true, of course, but the way this reads just seems kind of crazy. And the whole passage reminds me, in fact, of 1984, with at the end, Kitaro just repeatedly saying to himself, do it, do it, do it. Do what? Who knows? Leave the corporation? Attempt to fight them? Either way, it's pretty detailed insight into the mental state that an Arasaka desk job has the potential to put you in. But should you die on the job, well, that's even worse. Further upstairs, on a laptop, not a terminal this time, is an email from Laura Brown, desperately asking for the body of her husband, Tom, to be released to her, which has been held by the company for 2 weeks. He'd worked for Arasaka for 15 years as a senior operator, but now, not only will they not release his body back to his family, they're suing his wife for damages that his death on the job caused to the company, with all that Laura can do being to threaten to take this story to the media. Unfortunately for her, they very clearly hold all the cards here. Apparently, the toxicology report confirmed that Tom had been using substances at work, which, to be honest, with these hours in this environment, is likely a necessary thing for many people to do your job proficiently. What's worse is he, or rather his next of kin, are now being sued specifically to repair a hydraulic press, potentially also giving insight into the horrible way he might have died. But until Arasaka have all of their cyberware back, they can hold what's left of the guy for as long as they want. Finishing up then with effectively the threat that should Laura do anything to slander the Arasaka Corporation, even in private correspondence, they will basically have the right to sue her to all hell. Yet another example in this world of just how hyper-corporatized everything is, where Arasaka is so powerful that even in awful scenarios like this, they basically can control the situation in whatever way they want. Though there are some individuals they clearly still struggle to pin down. Also, in this area is a piece specifically reporting on Takamura, and for the whole of Act 2, Arasaka have been sending camouflage agents, people to monitor borders, docks, and the spaceport, yet have turned up absolutely nothing, with Takamura all the while just strolling around Japantown looking for actual decent food. And reading this, I don't think we give the guy enough credit, not just for how well he did hiding from one of the world's most powerful megacorporations, but also just how he made it look so effortless. And it's nice to see that there actually was a bit of a search going on for him within Arasaka itself. But that's about all the hidden details before the main fight with Adam Smasher, and I do love the arena for this one in the devil ending. It's a fair bit easier to navigate around than the one outside Mikoshi. Defeating Smasher though, and heading up into Yorinobu's office, I suppose, there's one more terminal we can read in here, this time calling out just how ludicrous it is that top-ranking Arasaka officers with over 20 years of experience now have to answer to Adam Smasher, leaving the threat that if things don't improve, people will start to defect to competition, though I'm pretty sure Arasaka have legal causes and cyberware in place to stop employees from doing that. Either way though, the sender clearly wasn't brave enough to put their name in this feedback form. And to be fair, would you openly shit-talk Adam Smasher if he was your temporary boss? What with him being a deranged cyber psycho who genuinely gets off on killing innocents and is the worst man in the world? I didn't think so. Though the computer ID for this email can still be seen, so I very much doubt the guy who lodged this complaint is still alive anymore. Or at any rate, maybe got his cyberware stripped off of him and thrown out into the street. Another thing we can find in here though is the same Arasaka family photograph that Hanako and Saburo had a copy of. But with Yorinobu's, he's chosen to cover his father's face with a cup. And I think all three together illustrate the importance of Hanako throughout this whole situation. She is the only one on loving terms with both of them, and the only one in all three pictures. The family heart, and the one ultimately with the power to decide what will become of her family. At first, having chosen her brother, letting the family move on and evolve, only to now be backpedaling, despite still very much loving Yorinobu. Of course, we'll first get to have this conversation with him, where Yorinobu effectively reveals that he hates Arasaka. He was hoping to destroy it, to greater effect than Morgan Blackhand and Johnny Silverhand did 54 years ago. And if you want to know the full details on how Yorinobu is actually the hidden hero of Cyberpunk 2077, then check out that video when you're done here. But of course, as we saw in some of the messages on our way up here, Yorinobu did still have his father's ruthlessness. Though he and Saburo had literally opposite goals, neither seemingly cared who had to die in order to achieve them. And now, Yorinobu, or at least his personality, memory, everything he is, his soul, if you will, is going to die, to be replaced by the father he hated and killed. And if you look very closely here, before the scene goes black, you can see Hanako produce a biochip, just as we pass out. In the dream sequence that follows, we'll have a chance to say goodbye to Johnny, either amicably or with great hostility, though sadly he didn't mention the fact that I'd been lying when I said I'd ask Panam for help, which would have been another cool bit of salt in the wound. After this brief exchange, we then wake up on the top secret Arasaka orbital station, creating its own artificial gravity it seems via a centrifuge, thus presumably allowing the scientists on board to conduct experiments much as they would on Earth, though perhaps sometimes they can also then stop it spinning to allow for full zero-G experiments. It would of course make sense if we were wanting to do that for them to be in space. And we can also see by scanning the equipment in our room that it's been specifically calibrated to work in a zero-G environment. Now, this part of the ending in particular runs far more like an interactive cutscene with not too many secrets to go off and discover. The Devil Tarot card is unlocked this way, though that happens automatically. The friends we can call will be based on who we've struck up up friendships and relationships with earlier, with the quality and content of said calls varying depending on how well we know the person, i.e. how many of their quests we've completed and whether they're romanced or not. So quite a bit of variation with those, but ultimately making no impact beyond the phone call itself on the game's ending. And during the sequence where we have to complete a series of tests, the empathy gauging one in particular is very much a reference to Blade Runner, I think, describing a graphically upsetting scene in an attempt to gauge emotion. But again, how we respond to these tests appears to have no differing outcome. The main detail worth keeping an eye out for comes when Takemura, or indeed Hellman maybe, visits us at the end, providing the sad news that we are still going to die imminently, with the only hope now of survival being to sell our soul to Arasaka. But take a look here at the contract, specifically item 2. No copy of the engram beyond the original created by Arasaka Corp will exist. Except, hold on, because way back at the Arasaka residence, we read some no doubt confidential emails that Arasaka were indeed attempting to replicate multiple copies of engrams for additional nefarious purposes, meaning the words and promises written in this contract mean nothing.
Arasaka keeps its word, always.
Yeah, no, you know what, Goru, that was probably the worst thing you could have said in that moment. So returning home to die is perhaps the more morbid of the two choices, but we will at least, for the brief time we have left, be free. And in that particular ending, Hanako will actually chase us up with an offer for more work. So perhaps when Takemura said that she'd forgotten us already, she was downplaying just how valuable we'd be to the company, which in my eyes is just another reason not to sign this thing, becoming permanently Arasaka property and their tool to be spun up and deployed on their whims, with no remaining free will of our own left, and ultimately to serve as an Atom Smasher 2.0. Or perhaps they will indeed duplicate V's engram, uploading one to a body for physical missions whilst siphoning the mental resilience of another. Overall, there's so much cool stuff to find and do in the devil ending. It is of course the worst outcome in my opinion of the game due to the return of Saburo, but that doesn't mean it isn't still worth playing through due purely to gameplay. But now, let's move on to a slightly less, but still kind of downerish ending. The only ending with the option to be accessed separately to meeting Hanako at Embers is the one added by Phantom Liberty, the tower. To get this to begin with though, you'll first have to ensure that Songbird is recaptured by the NUSA at the end of the expansion, which makes up 2 of the 4 endings to that. And then, when on the rooftop, either after meeting Hanako or before, it doesn't really matter, we'll want to select the option to raise Reed on the Hollow. And whilst Johnny will lightly beg that we find another way, this, in actual fact, is the only way to truly and definitively save V's life, but at a terrible cost. And after a tearful, bittersweet farewell to Johnny,
good night, Valerie. Today was a good day.
will awaken from a coma 2 years later in 2079. According to Reed, the surgery didn't quite work out as planned. The neural matrix was able to repair our brain better than any other procedure ever could, but with the consequence that V can no longer use anything bar the most basic of Chrome, effectively dulling all superhuman abilities, making them forevermore a normie. Not to mention the 2-year coma during which all of V's closest friends moved on. Now, there is actually a great alternate theory by laid-back gamers about this, that V was actually a Winter Soldier-esque sleeper agent during this time. I'll leave a link to that down below. But today, we simply want to look at all the new bits of lore that we can learn in 2079. And my god, there is a lot. This ending is certainly the most lacking in terms of action, but it makes up for that in just how much we can learn during this flash forward, with most of that being found online. The moment Reed leaves the room during this ending, we're given the option to take a look at a laptop left inside the room, with several websites and stories about new goings-on in the world. The first of these is NC Inquirer, Max Jones's website, whom will have saved in a gig 2 years prior, and which aims to be a foil for the corporate-bought N54 and WNS networks, delivering truth that nobody else dare. So first up, in Night City, by 2079, all homeless people have apparently disappeared. We saw the beginnings of this 2 years ago, corporations quietly eliminating them so that the campgrounds can be repurposed for corporate gain. Meanwhile, Zetatech have been striking deals with city officials and expanding massively. We'll see more of that later. In Arroyo, AV traffic has been picking up hugely, preventing many residents now from getting a proper night's sleep. People still remember the Air Force One crash of 2077, and in 2079, an FIA agent was apparently captured by NightCorp, attempting to steal corporate data. NightCorp, by the way, are probably a fair ways into an operation to control the minds of all NC citizens by this point, having started with the mayor and their own employees back in 2077. And finally, in Night City, a newly mutated bacteria is infecting the residents of Wellsprings, potentially something let loose by Biotechnica, which certainly wouldn't be the first time that's happened. On to world events, which, to be fair, I believe we can actually read this segment and it's the exact same back in 2077, so maybe Max Jones needs to update this segment, but we'll cover it either way. Starting with the fate of one of the last veterans of the Second Corporate War, fought between 2008 and 2010. They were sadly recently found dead outside Minsk, having apparently been extremely malnourished, but deciding to end things themselves, after a Sovoil agent demanded the return of their heart implant. The reward for a life of service, I suppose. Also, in Eastern Europe, in this timeline where Yugoslavia still exists and has annexed Albania, tensions are heading into conflict across that entire region. Meanwhile, down in what's now called the Amazon Plains, nomads are attempting to reclaim their homeland from mega agro corporations, who years ago cut and burned the entire rainforest to the ground. And after an explosion occurred out of a Biotechnica lab in southern Italy, a new epidemic of skin rashes and blurred vision is occurring across the region. Meanwhile, the German branch of Biotechnica is attempting to engineer genes that make brains smaller. And though it's currently limited to animal testing only, I can imagine this eventually gets done at a human level in an attempt to more easily control the general populace. But that was just 2079 in the Night City Inquirer. We also have the Militech website news, claiming that Militech gear is now 200% more effective in protecting from Netrunner attacks than rival companies. Though, much more interestingly, is that Militech is in the final stages of creating its own division of anti-cyberpsycho units to rival MaxTech, citing that lot have been growing increasingly ineffective of late. So maybe in Cyberpunk Orion or Cyberpunk 2, we'll be seeing, in addition to MaxTech, a Militech-based alternative unit. Then there's the Kerry Eurodyne website, with general gossip on the most famous rocker boy in the world, who also happens to be our friend, including the latest on his new tour up at the Crystal Palace, though we can also just have a conversation with Kerry about this, like, right now anyways. Zetatech 2 have a website here. As we know, they've really taken over these past 2 years, and this mentions their new AV, called the Chariots, which will be debuting in 2080, as well as a piece of immunocyberware that's meant to reduce the risk of cyberpsychosis. Though I'll bet you they're also now upping the cyberpsychosis risk on anyone who doesn't buy one, but we'll come back to Zetatech shortly. Delamain still has an up-and-running website, though depending on how you chose to end his string of quests, this fact might actually be a little strange. Fine, if you reset him, he presumably continues as normal there, but if you destroyed OG Delamain, then only one car remains in the fleet, which we'll reunite with soon, so why he'd still have a website at that point is interesting. But finally, the website of the Night City Mayor's office, with info on what Jefferson Perales has done in his first 2 years in office, and I believe this is going to vary depending on what exactly we tell him come the end of Dream On. Perales' predecessor, Mayor Ryan, had been a huge supporter of Netwatch, what with his mother being an agent, setting up a fund during the end of his time for veterans of the agency. Jefferson will scrap this if we don't make him aware that he's being controlled, or he'll keep it running if we tell him the truth. Similarly, he'll either tighten up Night City airspace if lied to, or ease restrictions if told the truth. And NCPD powers will be strengthened under a NightCorp-controlled Jefferson, or weakened massively by one who knows. So actually, despite the fact that Mr. Blue Eyes said it won't matter what we tell Perales, it actually really does. and this flash forward proves it. There's also one shard we can find in the medical center, but only if you initially sided with Songbird back in Phantom Liberty, which would have inevitably led to the massacre at the spaceport. If so, on the desk is a shard that tells us how every month for the last 2 years, the families of those lost have gathered at the spaceport entrance to pay their respects and leave tributes. Night Corp, though, lovely corporation that it is, constantly finds this a pain and attempts to disperse the crowds, with one councilman, spoken about here, threatening to hit the victims with tear gas or worse before claiming they're attempting to start a riot. And even when a young girl whose father died here 2 years ago looks at him holding a stuffed animal, clearly not a violent riot inciter, the councilman just wills himself not to see her. He is there to do the bidding of the corporation, which itself will always choose profit over compassion. If you think that's sad though, then just read the texts that many of V's friends left for them over the past 2 years. 21 missed calls from Judy, along with continually worried texts. 13 from Kerry, who seems to care a little less but still does. 17 from River, so if we're going by calls, then Judy is a 20% more caring love interest than he is. 6 calls from Victor, but easily the winner here is Panam with 55 calls. Her texts are also the most angrily concerned. I do still find it weird that she doesn't want to talk to us when we do finally call back though. Like, you'd think that after all this time with a reasonable explanation, she'd come around to being okay. I don't know, this kind of lowers my opinion of her, this whole not answering thing. I mean, all of them have moved on at this point, which is fair enough, but the rest at least have the decency to answer. Perhaps most importantly here though is what happened to our apartments and our pets. All it says in these texts is that they were acquired by an anonymous purchaser, but if we fast forward briefly to the end credit messages, we can see Nibbles playing in the background behind Rogue. So she, I guess, was kind enough to take on responsibility for at least Nibbles, if not the iguana too, which is nice. Jumping back though, and that's about it at the medical center, so let's return to Night City, where no matter what, our good friend Delamain will be there for us in some form. Either his original self, though reset, so not really remembering much about us, operating as he always has, or if you did either the blowing up or merging of Del's core, then only one car was left, named either Excelsior or Delamain Jr. In both of these timelines, he's then operating as just a single cap, still ferrying passengers but with absolutely no business plan and no need for eddies. So he simply gets by, asking passengers to fill his tank with Chew 2 when needed. Kind of like a marooned being from beyond the Blackwall, now attempting to survive as nothing but a simple car in this world of matter and humans. Sounds kind of like a movie plot, to be fair. But looking out the window during this drive, it's clear that Militech have tightened their grip on Night City. There's military checkpoints and posters all around the place, and come to think of it, maybe the reason that all the homeless citizens were quietly gotten rid of is because their undocumented status, their lack of digital ID, made them harder for corps like Militech to monitor and control. We then learn that despite being left as the CEO of Arasaka in this timeline, after these 2 years, Yorinobu is still removed from that position, after the company cottons on to the fact that he's trying to dismantle his father's life's work from within. And if you want to know more about that whole plot, then again, check out Yorinobu Arasaka as the hidden hero of Cyberpunk 2077. Anyway, heading up to Victor's, it's clear that everything around here has changed. Bradbury and Burren, the streets where Victor and Misty worked, was recently acquired by the corpse, and that homely, nice market vibe is completely gone. In the spots where Gary the Prophet used to preach are several posters of the guy. You didn't listen to me, and then the bloodsuckers descended on us with their suits and false smiles. You let them in, and now you are their slaves and livestock. Again, Gary's words may have had a supernatural twist, but were ultimately true. The beauty of Misty's esoterica, for instance, the chimes and incense, have been replaced by the whirring and buzzing of a Zetatech clinic, with Misty's old sign just discarded and covered out back, next to a shard once again alluding to Night Corp. They're the ones who bought up the land in this district to suit corporate interests, and this shard threatens any protest against the fact with criminal prosecution. That includes loitering, attempting to claim compensation for seized market stalls, or generally just doing anything that Night Corp don't like. I guess maybe they are still a few years away from just controlling the citizens' minds and quelling any rebellious thoughts. We can also see that this particular shard was issued in December 2078, so it actually can't have been been that many months since this whole upheaval happened. An upheaval that forced even Vic's clinic to adopt the same soulless look, with Victor himself having to don the Zetatech uniform. Now, in one of my playthroughs for this ending, something did bug, and Vic is still in his original clothes. That's not supposed to happen, but that's why you might see him not in his uniform all the time here. In fairness, Zetatech didn't force him to remove all boxing trophies just to keep them tucked out of the way, making sure that Zetatech products take center stage. And Vic's TV for watching boxing is gone too. Looks like his schedule is entirely dictated by Zetatech now. Finally, on his computer is first a conversation with Misty. Vic tried to convince her at first to stay with him, but Misty refused, claiming that this environment would ultimately be toxic and would slowly poison both mind and soul. To be honest, I think Misty is probably making a wise decision here, and mysticism aside, no way is Victor going to be as happy as he was before, especially when we read the second email, with his supervisor praising Vic's technical excellence, but requesting that he cut out the chatter with clients. They would like him to be your soulless surgeon with a scalpel, not your friendly neighborhood ripperdoc. Vic no longer has customers, he has clients. Just another cog, really, in the corpo machine now. And we can even say as much during this bittersweet conversation. But that's about it for all the hidden details of the tower ending to be found, so now let's head over to the afterlife for some hidden details about Rogue. When choosing to put V's life in the hands of Johnny and Rogue, we'll be able to find a lot more hidden details. First at the afterlife, then Arasaka Tower, and eventually at V's high-rise penthouse. So first of all, after convincing Rogue to join him on yet another heist of a lifetime, Johnny and her will follow through on the events of the blistering love quest, with Johnny then waking up in Rogue's pad at the afterlife. And here we can see several things. First, pictures from Rogue in 2023 or earlier, one with Johnny, one with Carrie, and one, more interestingly, with Johnny and Maximum Mike, aka the Morrow Rock radio DJ, better known in real life as Mike Pondsmith, the very creator of Cyberpunk, who of course made himself a character in his world. He's got about 48 minutes where he talks about conspiracies on Morrow Rock Radio, but for ease of listening, I have compiled them into a single video, which you can listen to over on my second channel. A lot of awesome and wacky stuff discussed there. We can also see that Rogue keeps a drawing of her from her son, which presumably was made as a child. And a little more digging around this place all but confirms who that son is. On the table is a shard titled Greetings from Nowhere, a message from an old friend who stopped by the afterlife but couldn't bring himself to go inside, so he also swung by the Atlantis, that bar that Johnny meets with Rogue and Santiago at during the Never Fade Away flashback. And this leads me to assume that the writer of this message is actually Santiago himself, who, after Alt's botched rescue in 2013, became Rogue's rebound relationship from Johnny. The shard confirms that the two later broke up, obviously, but not before having a kid together. And if you've read the short story in Cyberpunk Red called Black Dog about a team of 6 edge runners, you'll be familiar with Trace Santiago, son of Nomad Santiago and almost certainly Rogue as well. In fact, if we look behind the bar in the afterlife, we can also see a photograph of the Black Dog crew as they were in 2045. And wouldn't it make sense for Rogue to want to display her own son as pride of place in her bar? And whilst none of this is outrightly stated in-game, all clues certainly point towards it. Below Trace's picture is another shard relating to Rogue's transfer of ownership for the afterlife, which she is having managed by Asukage and Finch, a top law firm that usually only takes on corporate clients. Now, we of course know Rogue's upcoming fate on this op, but it's interesting that she chose to transfer ownership of the afterlife beforehand anyway. For all she knew, she was coming out of this alive, so why wouldn't she return to the afterlife after that? Well, I think the answer lies in the subtext established from previous quests. It's pretty much spelled out that after her role in the tower bombings, in order to be left alone to run the most prestigious Merc bar in Night City whilst corporations turned a blind eye, she had to first do a deal with Arasaka. She did some work with them alongside Adam Smasher, much to her guilt, because Smasher is the one that killed Johnny. But now, going full-on assault on the tower once again will no doubt invalidate that peace treaty entirely. Rogue will no longer be able to sit the undisturbed queen of the afterlife anymore, and therefore her only choice is to transfer ownership. Maybe to us, we are running this show and being called boss by the end, but Rogue had no idea we'd come out of this op alive either, so surely that would be a reckless move. Rather, I think she transferred the afterlife to her son Trace as the official owner, with him then later permitting us to run the place after all is said and done. So perhaps, in this timeline at least, Trace Santiago will be the future king of the afterlife. But jumping forward, it's time then to arm up for the op. And be sure to pick up Prejudice here, one of the best assault rifles in the game that's gonna pair beautifully with the Pride pistol, which we'll also get later. Then it's time to talk to Alt, and Johnny here will get a little bit of bonus dialogue if you made the right choice earlier in the Never Fade Away flashback, provided you pursued neither of these two blue dialogue options back then, which is like, I mean, who doesn't choose the blue dialogue options? But if you didn't, then Alt will allow Johnny to say one last thing at the end. Just a little more closure for him. Though in reality, this isn't actually Alt anyway. It's an AI, which absorbed some of her data, which I explore in my video, The AIs You Should Never Bargain With in Cyberpunk 2077. Now, leaving NetSpace, Johnny can actually stop by this mirror for a heartfelt talk to V.
V, don't know if you can hear me, but thanks for trusting me. Let's do this.
As we head back into the bar, we then actually hear Rogue telling her son about the Asukaga and Finch transfer, further most likely confirming that theory. And now it's over to Arasaka Tower, with Rogue getting a chance to actually catch Johnny as he stumbles, saving him, unlike 2023. But things go sideways, of course, and we crash land into the Arasaka rainforest floor. There's no board meeting this time, but there are a few more things to find. With our first job to go and rescue Wayland, who's still trapped in the AV. You can ignore this and let him die, that is an option, but it's also a horrible thing to do. So going to rescue him, make sure also not to miss the caretaker's spade, hidden somewhere around the conference table. It's a great two-handed melee weapon, not to mention an awesome reference to The Witcher, which will remain in our inventory even after this ending is done. If you activate this terminal, you can also stick on some samurai, so Johnny can literally storm Saka Tower to the sound of his own voice, and if you come here as a netrunner, then activating this table will also create one mighty distraction.
In 2077, what makes someone a criminal? Getting caught.
Fighting our way through that floor though, into the elevator to the atrium, this floor contains some info you'd also have uncovered in the Devil ending. We may be seeing Arasaka Tower from a different angle here, but obviously many of the same things are happening on the inside. We can once again learn about Arasaka making additional backups of people in the Secure Your Soul program, not that we have to bear that in mind as much as we're here this time to destroy it, not join it. And here as well, we begin to see the first shards mentioning various space exploration missions. This will mostly all show up again together later, so we'll go over them then, but this certainly feels like a bit of foreshadowing for where this ending is ultimately going to lead us. In this boardroom, we can find that same email from the Devil ending, the not-so-anonymous complaints about Adam Smasher being put in charge of security, as well as the one about the upcoming Arasaka board meeting. Now, this one actually raises an interesting question, which is, has the board meeting, wherein Yorinobu massacred a bunch of Arasaka execs, already taken place in this timeline? In the Devil ending, things kick off immediately. We go and rescue Hanako and fly straight to Arasaka Tower, whereas here, Johnny and V slept for days whilst Rogue organized this op. Therefore, presumably that meeting must have already happened, though if it did, I expect it probably and must have ended peacefully. After all, those guys didn't seem too fussed about honoring Saburo's legacy to begin with, and it was only ours and Hanako's untimely arrival that seemed to trigger all the violence. Though ultimately, this whole point is up for speculation, so I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments. But then, as we fight our way down the atrium here, you can learn all about the Arasaka family history, if you like, with Shard speculating how Saburo would cede power to his descendants, assuming that Hanako is the only heir he'd actually trust. Another about the division of Arasaka into bird-themed factions, with Hanako leading the traditional Kiji faction, Yorinobu the more radical Taka faction, and Hato the more public publicly amenable faction led by Michiko, Hanako and Yorinobu's niece. We can also then read, more specifically, excerpts from Yorinobu and Hanako's biographies, with Yorinobu the rebellious black sheep of the family, as we've already established, and Hanako an enigma that seemingly nobody has ever managed to write a full book about before. The last guy who tried wound up shooting himself in the back 10 times. But this author, who actually can also be seen in an episode of Ziggy Q, felt he needed to finish this book after seeing archived footage of Hanako playing the piano so beautifully that he cried. Reaching the bottom of the atrium, the server room where we'll plug in alts, we can read the same report on Secure Your Soul clients as we saw in the Devil ending. And to be fair, this email is all over the place in pretty much all Arasaka Tower endings, but here we can also read an emergency directive, explaining that in the event of a building lockdown, all entrances and exits will be sealed, as well as communications cut off to the outside world, leaving all security and civilian employees alike trapped inside. So bear that in mind. The sheer number of employees now locked in here against their will as we plug in the Alt AI, and she hits the delete button on many, if not all of them. I mean, I'd assume it's only the ones who get in our way, given we see them sequentially being taken down as we advance, but it's not absolutely clear whether everybody in the building does actually just die. We'll then reach the lower level, where Mikoshi is housed, and a lot of what you can find here can also be discovered in the Don't Fear the Reaper ending. But let's cover it here just the once. First of all, a diagnostic report relating to some issues with Mikoshi's cooling in Core 3, which was described as not ideal, but not a catastrophe. And I don't know about you, but that phrasing, coupled with an issue around something called Core 3, feels like a reference to Chernobyl, wherein they initially say in the TV show that the radiation readings are not great, but not terrible. Then there's the same report as we saw in the Devil ending, citing slow progress on Secure Your Soul, again highlighting just how important Hellman is to the program. But then there's a much more curious aspect. In this initial guard room, looking up to the ceiling, we can open a hatch to some ventilation shaft area. Following that along, we can then drop down to some bizarre makeup desk den with Bushido posters and a laptop that doesn't open. Normally the ones like this do open up when they're just laying like this, but this one doesn't, nor are there any shards or notes to explain what this room is or what it's doing in this top secret floor. Perhaps it's simply a hidey hole where a guard likes to get ready in the morning? A very strange concept if so, but maybe it was once part of an Easter egg or something that was ultimately cut. Maybe one of you watching have even seen this laptop open before, but as far as I can tell, this chamber is just a strange little secret. So back to the main path, and we can also read about a leak in information regarding Secure Your Soul and a VIP client who's a writer from the Netherlands named Leendert de Vages. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. With the incident in question further confirming that not only are Arasaka creating unsolicited copies of engrams, but they're also attempting to directly extract data from the digitized minds of specific clients, a fact that they worried had been leaked to the public. Arasaka not only want to avoid that at all costs, of course, but maintain the illusion that Secure Your Soul is completely safe, maintaining the interest of their high-powered clientele. And making our way down right to the Mikoshi entrance, we can read Arasaka's real-time reaction to the death of Saburo Arasaka. Nobody in the company, of course, bought Yorinobu's story, but even still, they made sure to bring in Arasaka's own external policing units and not allow the NCPD to open an official investigation. That's, you know, how it didn't become public knowledge that Saburo died of strangulation or a head injury, not poisoning, as Yorinobu claimed. And finally, before we face off against Adam Smasher, there's one more little fun thing we can do here. Outside the Netrunning Center, there's a van which can actually be driven inside here and parked right across the corridor leading to Mikoshi. My thought was that it would slow Adam Smasher down a bit, maybe give Rogue some more time to get a little extra distance, but yeah, no, it don't work like that, sadly. Another full Smasher fight later though, and this time Mikoshi lies as the prize at the end. Just make sure to head back to the door first and pick up Rogue's Pride. It is hands down the best pistol in the game and worth pursuing this ending just to get alone. Otherwise, the way to Mikoshi is clear. But first, let's make just a little circle around it, past where Hellman summoned Saburo in the Devil ending, as there's a few more things to find around here, namely poetry about being dead and media reports on the relic, but also some info info on who exactly can access Mikoshi, explaining that every single session requires a very special permit and each will be recorded. And I presume this pertains to things like family visits, so no talking to your deceased relatives without Arasaka looking over your shoulder, as if the place wasn't already enough of a prison. But plugging in, V, Johnny and Alt will all head inside, first finding ourselves back on the rooftop above Misty's, where we'll pass a cat twice on our way up. And that's got to be a nice little Matrix nod, because we are of course now indeed inside a simulation, and seeing a cat twice in a row was their signal in that movie for a glitch happening in the Matrix. If Jackie was also captured by Arasaka, then a very faint echo of his too will be here. If not, then it'll be a fleeting visit. Onto the big and heartbreaking reveal though that V will die, independent of whatever Alt does, and the only thing you may not realize here is V's responses to Johnny in this moment will largely depend on the dialogue we chose back at the Pistis Sophia. If V agreed back then to give their life for Johnny, provided it made sense, then V will be far more reserved here, upset by all of this of course, but ultimately acknowledging the deal they made. But if V made no such deal, said the body was theirs and always had been, then Johnny's attempt to steal it will be met with violent but ultimately futile resistance.
Are you fucking kidding me? There are no options, you two-faced sack of shit! You're out, I'm in. That was the deal.
But that's a very dark timeline to go down, arguably the darkest, and we'll come back to a less disturbing way to reach the Temperance ending shortly. For now, let's cede V's body back to them, drift off into cyberspace, and let V awaken as Night City's greatest merc. V will be laying next to either nobody or whomever we called back on the rooftop, with the four main romances, Panam, Judy, River and Kerry, being the options. Around this penthouse apartment will be a lot of the stuff we had in our mega building one, though much more spread out now of course, with Scorpion's statue, River's VR headset and the iguana all making appearances. V is also receiving ads for security bots in this place, though realistically of course they absolutely don't need one, especially since they're about to undertake an even more dangerous and daring heist than the last one. A raid on the Crystal Palace on behalf of Mr. Blue Eyes to steal the data of the world's most prestigious clientele. And for this, scattered about the apartments are various shards on space, and specifically space stations. Now, I'd love to tackle space in significantly more detail in a future video, so I will be fairly brief here. But there's been several expeditions over the years, including Pathfinder, which was a manned mission to Jupiter back in 2020 that nobody has heard from since the Fourth Corporate War, so maybe there's a space empire brewing out there on Jupiter's moons, who knows. Then there's the O'Neill station, which made the mistake of outnumbering workers to guards by 40 to 1, naturally resulting in the workers rising up, rebelling, and in 2022 establishing an independent colony, which, what with being in space and all, meant there was literally nothing anybody could do about it. Then there's a piece on the Valar mission, which argues that the still ongoing space race is no longer healthy competition, but actually a massive hindrance to space exploration as a whole, given everybody keeps destroying each other's advances and not openly sharing valuable data. And finally, going back to a shard from Arasaka Tower, just to keep all of the space stuff together, there's an article about what it's like to live in space, with the sub-Earth gravity being a negative, bad for bone density, but ultimately the safety of a space station far outweighing that, what with it being a place very difficult to invade, free from the control of tyrannical governments, and devoid of competing employers driving workers to the bone, meaning space may just be the most peaceful place to live on Earth. As for V's upcoming space op, we can find on their laptop that firstly, the orbital tanker we'll be using to get to space was acquired by Emmerich, the bodyguard at the Afterlife, no doubt pulling strings with old contacts of Rogue. Second, a look at the negotiating tactics of Mr. Blue Eyes himself, pressing V for an answer on the op, asking, will I be pleasantly surprised or disappointed once again? A phrasing I feel may refer back to the Dream On quest, where we ultimately upturned Blue Eye's entire plan to control the mayor of Night City. There's also an ad for clouds here, and a building-wide email asking for donations towards Miss Green, who's been taking care of the building for years. And despite the fact that V has only just moved in, they're expected to pitch in all the same. And I can't help but feel like this one is a Friends reference. There was, I think, an episode where Ross boss wouldn't donate to his building caretaker for the exact same reason, and Miss Green would then be in reference to Rachel Green. But let me know in the comments what you think on that theory. And after potentially a heartfelt farewell to our chosen love interest, I've covered that entirely in its own separate video, by the way, all romances ranked worst to best, which is as much a deep dive as a ranking, to be honest. But after that, it's into the new Delamain AV, with his voice, once again, being determined by how we ended the Delamain questline. Del will maintain his formality if he was reset, but his lighter spoken variant will use a few more colloquialisms. It's interesting that in this timeline, both variants did go forward with the Rayfield deal to be installed into AVs as well, as Del Jr. and Excelsior in the Phantom Liberty ending implied that he's just been going around as a lone car this whole time. So perhaps it was V, specifically here, who had a hand in helping that version of Del complete on this deal. After all, if V is taking frequent AV trips to the afterlife across this time, it makes sense that they'd want a driver they can trust. Now, you may have noticed the absence of Nibbles the cat back at the apartment, and that's because he now lives at the afterlife, apparently. But someone who may not be there anymore is Claire. If we went against her wishes and won the race during the Beast in Me, then Claire will remain mad at us through the rest of the game, and I guess when we become king or queen of the afterlife, it's no longer a place Claire wants to work. Though, Wayland will still mention telling the story of Sakatawa to Claire 3 times already, so maybe it's just a case that she ducks out when we, the boss, show up. Very petty if you ask me, especially if we told her the whole time we were only racing to win, but there we go. I'm sure for most of you, Claire will be there happy and ready to have a chat about who we're gonna drink to. But onto our meeting with Mr. Blue Eyes before the final sequence in the space tanker, and a couple little more things here before the credits roll. First, we have Victor's analysis of Mr. Blue Eyes, a man who apparently nobody has ever heard of, suggesting he's either some major player behind the scenes in Night City, or just generally incredibly shady, probably both. Though in reality, there are several more clues pertaining to who exactly he is, which I pieced together in the grand unified Mr. Blue Eyes conspiracy. Finally then, there's info on the op that V is about to undertake, though sadly, one we may never get to play. It confirms that Blue Eyes, probably with the help of Night Corp, have taken control of the Crystal Palace's ID systems, leaving V to take care of just security and accessing the palace's safes on the admin levels. There's only one route for this op, and due to the brief window of the Crystal Palace shutting down and testing its new security system, the advanced warning systems shouldn't detect us. Sounds a hell of a lot like Don't Fear the Reaper, but with more prep work and in space, so I have little doubts that V will ultimately succeed with the op, though that is left open, of course. Speaking of Don't Fear the Reaper though, let's go back now to visit a couple more hidden details. Not much at all really, because it mostly just crosses over with this ending, but just a couple things. And it's also a better means by which to reach temperance. Don't Fear the Reaper may require you to wait a solid 5 minutes atop this rooftop before it triggers, but even with that, it is by far the quickest main ending. Zero setup, just literally walk in and fight your way down. In the entrance lobby first though, is a shard about how Arasaka employees are expected to conduct themselves in this Night City branch, with one being that they're forced to possess the latest firmware as their form of identification. After all, an imposter would then need to chrome themselves up with the same Arasaka chrome at great expense. But naturally, this also forces employees to remain loyal to the company, what with half of their body now being owned by their employer. In operational crises, all Arasaka agents must report to the tower, a place that, again, we're about to unleash a deadly AI who's going to obliterate anyone who stands in our way, but this is the level of control corporations have over you in 2077. Though after fighting and getting in the elevator in this initial lobby, the path is basically identical to the latter part of Knockin' on Heaven's Door with Rogue, with just the Smasher fight then needing to be fought entirely solo, and Johnny being the one standing with us as we walk towards Mikoshi at the end. Difference being that V is still in control and ultimately gets to decide what to do with their body come the end. Again, this is by far the most morally okay way to give the body to Johnny and to get the temperance ending, and we'll look at that fully in a moment. But first, just one big difference if we reach the sun ending via Don't Fear the Reaper. Rogue is of course still alive. She never gave up, nor left the afterlife, and will still be there to celebrate and drink with us come the end. As too will Claire, even if you seemingly burned that bridge back during the Beast in Me. I guess with Rogue in charge, she just stayed on as usual, and in this particular instance, Claire doesn't want to make a scene in front of her boss. So, perhaps begrudgingly, still pours our drink of choice. Maybe knowing full well that we may never be seen again after today anyway. But other than this little interaction, the Sun ending plays out practically identically for both ending paths. So let's move on to all the extra details we can find when we give the body to Johnny. Johnny will awaken down in Pacifica, not too far away from the Pistis Sophia. I guess he just really enjoys lounging out at this location in particular. And first of all, we can see on V's old phone, which Johnny has also now taken possession of, or I suppose it's linked to V's cyberware perhaps, worried messages from Victor, Mama Wells, Misty, and worst of all, Judy. Not quite as hysterical as those we see in the tower ending, it's not been 2 years after all, but concerned nonetheless. In Johnny's bedroom, we can pick up an actual physical copy of Ovid's Metamorphosis, a book literally all about transformation, and indeed we could say that V perhaps metamorphosized into Johnny. But which entry we can then read once picking it up is gonna vary on if we were playing as a male or female, with female V getting book 3, which features Tiresias, a character whom through magic had experienced what it was like to be both a man and a woman. Exactly the same situation which Johnny now finds himself in too. But male V instead gets book 15, the end of Metamorphosis, called the Apotheosis of Julius Caesar, instead exploring the idea of the son ultimately surpassing the father, the fact that all of Caesar's great deeds in life are actually less important than ensuring his son Augustus succeeds him, that Caesar's legend is only immortalized due to his continued lineage. And I think there's some truth in that as well here, with V being the father and Johnny, in this case, being the son or successor that came after, continuing the life of this body. And Johnny will very much ensure V's legacy is preserved shortly. We can also then find the same 2 death-centric poems that were surrounding the access point to Mikoshi. Why So Many Candles is seemingly a first-person account of somebody dead at their own funeral, with the death of a mercenary being, well, V is a mercenary who died. If you are also reaching this from the Rogue ending, then Johnny will still have kept her pistol, so be sure to pick that up, and looking again in the mirror, this time the message to V will be a lot more somber.
V.
Maybe not a message, just a constant reminder. But aside from that, unlike the Sun ending, Johnny has very little in the ways of mementos, though perhaps he's actually doing something more important, inspiring a kid down the hall named Steve to learn the guitar and perhaps become a future rocker boy of his own. So Johnny enlists Steve's help to drive us around town for the afternoon, stopping off first at a guitar store. Johnny, of course, knows exactly what he's doing here, with observations and comments on pretty much everything. He can tell that all the guitars out front are utter crap, that Tainted Overlord have done pretty well for themselves.
Done pretty well for themselves. One of them's even moderately talented.
Kind of. We can also read about Kerry off on tour with us cracks, happily see that our own record is still on the shelves.
Still selling. Nice.
And finally, pay Kerry a little compliment.
Then we have the guy who transcends labels.
But ultimately, it's in the back of the store that we'll find what we're looking for. A choice of 2 legendary guitars, it doesn't really matter which, picked out for what we'll later learn is a heartwarming purpose. But with that, Steve will drive us to the Columbarium, where Johnny will ensure that V's legacy lasts for 100 years, buying a plaque in their name in which is placed their bullet pendants, which won't expire until the 21st of July 2177, presumably making that also today's date in-game, though not at all necessarily. Also, depending on the ending path by which we arrived here, if Rogue is no longer with us as well, then she too will get a plaque opposite, containing the best pistol in the game. Not sure I'd have given that up so willingly, but lore-wise, sure. Though that's about it for Temperance in terms of hidden details. There's not actually a ton here. This whole ending is more about Johnny fading into legend, doing one last thing to inspire one kid, and perhaps turn his life around from the shithole he was unfortunate enough to be born into. And in choosing to leave the very special, very expensive guitar with Steve before he leaves, Johnny ensures that the memory of him as an inspiring presence will linger on in Steve's mind. Every time Steve plays it, he'll think of, well, I suppose decompose V, and hopefully persevere with it all. As for Johnny, who knows? All that's left are some distraught and worried phone calls from V's friends, who I guess Johnny never had the courage to tell the truth to, leaving this whole thing on a bit of a downer, not gonna lie. So let's bring things back up with the secrets of the final, and in my opinion, absolutely best ending to the game. The whole star ending is similar in scale to the sun. A fair amount of setup at the Nomad camp going into the op, a long struggle to reach Arasaka Tower, followed by, to be fair, not too long of fights to Mikoshi. Once Panam picks us up and we arrive at the Nomad camp, heading into the Ripperdoc trailer behind Panam and Saul, there's firstly a laptop containing info about Militech, Biotechnica, and the Raffens. After stealing the Basilisk, Saul intercepts a transmission from Militech, who are preparing a high-res scan of the entire Badlands in order to find it. They, of course, want to recover their stolen tank and will take no prisoners when they do, ensuring that they first pay off the NCPD and media to look the other way at whatever atrocities they may be about to commit. Panam, though, is a little more skeptical of this, suggesting that maybe this message was deliberately broadcast as a tactic to scare the Aldecaldos out of hiding, but ultimately does agree that it isn't worth the risk to assume that. The Aldecaldos will therefore have to fully leave this area, and soon, which also further explains just why they so readily agree to this open assault on Arasaka Tower. Much as the family simply likes V, they're risking significantly more lives with this op. So the actual reason that they're agreeing to it is because the raid will provide all the funds and resources needed for the family to move down south. Our saving grace is incidentally also the Aldecaldos. Furthermore, we can read just how Saul tied up that Biotechnica deal. You know, the one that Panam was heavily against earlier in the Nomad questline. So, Saul sends a pretty blunt email to one of their execs, terminating their cooperation, and finishing up with, "I wish you the best of luck, into carving up whatever is left of this country into even smaller pieces. Yours faithfully, Saul." Finally, in files, a message to Saul confirming that the Raffens are on the retreat after we rolled up in a tank to repel their last attack. They likely won't be mounting full assaults on the entire group ever again, but might pick off those traveling alone down quieter roads. But ultimately, we know that those guys will be no more trouble in this ending. Next up, we'll head into the ice bath to make contact with Alt prior to the op, with the only hidden additional detail here being some extra dialogue if you've completed Phantom Liberty first. Alt will imply that we already have some idea what to expect inside Mikoshi after our encounter with either the Cerberus bots, infested with an AI from beyond the Blackwall, seeking to take over our world ever more easily as our technology advances, or, if we went to the spaceport, channeling the power of the Blackwall itself through Somi, with Alt drawing attention to just how insane that was when Song merely touched it. Finishing up that whole conversation, we'll awaken to be officially inducted into the Nomad clan, given a nice Aldecaldo jacket, which we'll hold on to even after this ending. Another thing we can hold on to here though, which you don't want to miss, is Cassidy's revolver, Amnesty. It's one of the absolute best revolvers in the game and fires at insane speeds. All you've got to do is agree to take part in Cassidy's bottle shooting challenge and hit 12 of them within the time limit. Maybe make a quick save immediately before, just in case, and yes, you can absolutely use a Sandevistan to cheat at this. Now, if you've done plenty of gigs and side quests before arriving at this ending, especially in the Badlands, then you'll also be able to have some special interactions with specific nomads around camp. First of all, if you choose the Nomad life path, then the Woman of La Mancha gig in Watson can be resolved by convincing Anna Hamill to join the Aldecaldos, after which she can be found around here entertaining some kids. If you saved Benedict McAdams during the Badlands gig MIA, then he'll also be at this camp, laying low whilst Militech still hunts for him. And the gig Goodbye Night City, where we rescue Bruce Welby from a Militech checkpoint, will result in Bruce joining up with this band as well, explaining he's finally started to feel at home. If you did the side quest Fortunate Son, procuring a kidney transplant for Jake's scooter and saving his life successfully, then he'll be here too, chilling out and playing the guitar. In fact, we can even hear an original Nomad song from him. Aside from that, there's target practice in the Basilisk with Mitch, going over things with Saul, being given a ton of free gear by Dakota, and sharing a drink with Bob, Teddy, and Carol, which is kinda sad if you know what's coming. After that, and one night of sleep, it's a quick tank ride down to the Maglev Tunnel construction site, owned by Night Corp but guarded by Militech. In fact, the subtle presence that Night Corp have in most of these endings, I think hints at an expanded role, or perhaps just more important one, in the next Cyberpunk game. And once arriving at the tunnel entrance and taking out the initial garrison, I'd recommend heading up to this little control center for some additional lore on this whole place. For instance, the drill they're using is called a subterranean extraction and removal combine, designed to pierce both rocky and unstable substances and specifically made for the construction of a maglev tunnel, with this tunnel in particular having posters and ads all over Night City during the game, with the idea here being to build an NCART route that can travel from Night City to Chicago in under 3 hours by 2080. And since Mike Pondsmith has confirmed in an interview not too long ago that we'll visit another city in Cyberpunk's sequel which he describes as Chicago gone wrong, my guess is that this will just be this world's version of Chicago, which makes even more sense when we consider there'll be a transit line heading directly between the two places. Maybe both areas will be free to roam and we can just jump back and forth whenever, or maybe we'll just visit it for a much more scripted sequence, but a very interesting tease for the future all the same. On the computer up here is then an email from Night Corp HR, assuring employees that Militech definitely isn't there because they're expecting to get attacked, what with the fact that they're burrowing under Arasaka Tower, which in the past has been a target for several terrorist assaults. Of course not, they just want the best security possible on site, so everybody is perfectly safe and need not worry. Yeah, anyway, the next message is about construction itself, explaining that things are progressing actually on schedule, and it's very important to ensure Night Corp still believe this billion-euro investment was worth it, and that a day from now, they're expected to reach the sensitive area. You know, the radioactive cesspool where the bomb went off in Arasaka Tower 54 years ago. This fact will actually be picked up on again later by Saul when we head through there, with Panam then asking if we're not positively saturated with radiation. There's no way of knowing that really, but maybe there will be some potential long-term health implications, at least for Panam and on a single thread of hope, us. But before heading inside the tower, the next interesting thing can be seen by coming around to the front of the drill, once it's burrowed into Arasaka. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of expected it to be pointy, so if any drill experts are watching, then maybe let everyone else know in the comments just how and why a giant flat drill works. I'm very intrigued. But moving quickly on, and the only place we won't have already headed through in the other previous endings is the Arasaka manufacturing plant, directly adjacent to Mikoshi. I mean, hats off to this plan, it's absolutely the most efficient way to reach the bottom of Arasaka Tower, with then the only email or message we haven't already looked at being a lockdown notice for this particular part of the tower, an automated procedure triggered as a result of the seismic activity detected below. This once again means all exits are closed, they'll be left to the mercy of us, and that the life support systems, which I guess are needed to possibly breathe down here, will be assigned on a basis of highest priority. So in other words, the managers will be saved whilst the workers are probably left to suffocate if this was left for a long enough period of time. Of course, instead, they're all going to be fried by Alt Cunningham anyway, who in this timeline also blows up that van that we can drive around down here after some scientists attempted to use it to flee. She is absolutely hungry for those Mikoshi souls and does not care who or how many people she has to flatline to get them. Not necessarily a trustworthy ally, I wouldn't say, though in fairness, we have just fought our way through with that exact same determinedness and ferocity. We can also once again access that hidden ventilation room in this ending too, by the way, but sadly the laptop still won't open. Again, I'd love to hear if anyone else has had better luck with that. Of course though, the major penalty of choosing this ending is that Saul meets his end under the boot of Adam Smasher. But aside from that, things play out pretty much the same as they did in Don't Fear the Reaper and Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Though one thing I haven't mentioned yet, which also crops up back in those endings, relates to Josh Kevorkian, the alleged investment guru who presents the business program Your Business is My Business, offering timely investment advice for various NC-based companies. And you can find a compilation of all his TV episodes down below. But in any ending where we assault Arasaka Tower, during the loading screen, if you load in from the main menu, Kevorkian is presenting a program on the dire state of Arasaka's share price. Our assault, one way or another, has caused it to take a major nosedive, with Kevorkian's advice simply being this.
I have only one recommendation, my friends. Sell. Sell now, while you still can.
Because, you know, an investment program where you're told to buy high, sell low is obviously a great one to watch for guidance. Admittedly, this raid is going to change the fundamentals of Arasaka as a company, so maybe he's actually not entirely wrong, but usually selling during a major dip is not necessarily a great idea, especially for the casual investor that would be watching this program. This isn't financial advice, by the way, because I think I have to say that. I'm just a guy talking about a video game. Do not make real-life investment choices based on what I'm saying. But Kevorkin telling everyone to sell Arasaka stock during this dip, I would guess is more likely being done to drive the price down further so that the execs can buy back at an even heavier discount. And it's probably just part of another tactic employed by the Night City elites to extract wealth upwards, where those at the top of the game can exploit everybody else. Also, this whole segment just reminds me of the most famous thing that Warren Buffett never said. You know, freak the fuck out and panic sell everything right now, it's fucking over. I mean, that's literally what Kevorkin is saying in this segment, after pumping Arasaka's stock price in many of the other ones in the game. Again though, you can check all of that out on my second channel. Where the star is completely different from the sun ending though, is in its final quest all along the Watchtower. Not a daring mission into space, but rather a quieter resolve to simply leave Night City with the nomads. With a little hope left that V could still survive a while here, a drug from Victor that lessens their symptoms, and a promise from Panam that there's contacts in Arizona who may be able to help. But if you do want a more detailed breakdown on how V could potentially survive every ending of Cyberpunk 2077, then I do have an entirely separate video on that. Again, this final quest is more about wrapping up story than leaving extra discoverable secrets and details. The only thing we can actually pick up before departing in the Basilisk is a shard excerpt from Homer's Iliad, specifically the part where Achilles has to decide whether to stay and fight in the Trojan War, dying but ultimately achieving everlasting glory, or to return home to live a longer, more peaceful life but not be immortalized in the minds of those who remember his glory days. With this shard leaning towards that second option. It's a final callback to Dex's quiet life versus blaze of glory question posed early on in the game, and I think it was deliberately left here as a subtle nod that in this ending we've chosen quiet life. As to whether the long and happy part is also going to be true for V may very well be a question we never actually get the answer to, but perhaps that's the point, and we'll just have to imagine what may happen after this. Though in this particular moment, it seems it'll be a fair bit quieter than what the sun ending has in store. Almost literally riding off into the sunset with our love interest, if we chose Panam or Judy, to be happy for as long as that remains possible. But if you want more details on how I'd rank the endings from worst to best and why, then check out that video next. Or if you want more videos delving into secrets, then I've done a very similar video for the endings to Phantom Liberty, and also ones for every single gig in the game, broken down by district. So comment below if there's any other cool little details you found in any of the endings that I haven't talked about here. I'd love to continue this conversation in the comments section. Massive thank you to the patrons and channel members as always for supporting me to deliver more content like this. Cheers for watching, I'm Sam Bram, and have a Nova day. Chooms.